minutes our president is before. Good morning again. Ladies and gentlemen, I am advised it's very, very cold in the chambers on this floor and in all the back offices and rooms, including the jury rooms, and I understand you're cold, and I apologize for it. The court is doing as best it can to try to see what's the problem, but you shouldn't be inconvenienced the way you are. You shouldn't be freezing. We put in a rush order for Hungarian goose down comforters. It's going to be some time before we get them. I hope that between that time and now that we can do something about the room. I'm sorry. So I apologize. Dr. Shafer, do you acknowledge, sir, you're still under oath and still sworn to tell the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. This is a redirect examination by the people. Mr. Walgren.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Mr. Walgren.
Dr. Shafer, you were asked, I believe maybe it was on Friday by Mr. Chernoff regarding your work in this case being pro bono at no charge.
That is correct.
Okay. And that's your custom, not unique to this case, but in any consultation work you do in this type of situation, correct?
Yes, it is.
And in your prior consultation work that you were questioned about, you have worked for both, for example, the side defending the doctor as well as the side alleging wrongdoing by the doctor.
That is correct.
And you have no agenda or principle that requires you to be on one side or the other. You just go with the science. Is that fair?
Correct, sir.
Well, the witness is an expert. I'm going to sustain the objection nevertheless, in view of the nature of the question. The answer is stricken. Disregard the last answer. You may re-ask it, Mr. Walgren.
Do you have any agenda or principle to be on one side or the other?
Not at all.
Is it based on the science?
Correct.
And in fact, you've consulted on one side and had opposing counsel ask you to consult for them on future cases.
In one case, that's correct.
Okay.
Witness.
I'll overrule the objection. 802.
In regard to your beliefs or your reasoning to do pro bono work in these types of situations, do you also follow the same principles in regard to your computer programs and software that you've developed?
Yes.
And is it your custom to publish your programs and your data and your spreadsheet online to make it freely available to other scientists and researchers in your field?
It is.
And why do you do that?
Objection to relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
It helps promote good science.
And how many programs or spreadsheets do you think you've published online to make freely available to other researchers such as yourself?
Including spreadsheets of my data, it would be well over 100 have been made available. In many of the manuscripts that I publish, the data are published so that other investigators can actually access the data and analyze it. And there's quite a bit of software that's available online that I've written and spreadsheets.
Thank you, Doctor. What is sedasis?
Sedasis is a system that is being developed by Ethicon Endosurgery to give propofol for sedation.
We have a spelling of that term.
Sedasys.
Thank you.
And what is your involvement with that?
I have chaired an advisory panel since 2003 that has that has advised Ethicon Endosurgery on both the standard of care for sedation and the issues that arise when propofol is used for sedation in order to help develop a machine that can do this safely.
And has your work in that regard been pro bono?
Since 2007, my work for Ethicon Endosurgery for sedasis has been provided pro bono.
And what is stand pump? And I believe that's STANPUMP?
Yeah.
What is that?
Stand pump is a program that I started develop. It's a computer program. I started developing it in 1986 with Don Stansky. The STAN does not stand for Stansky. It stands for Stanford University. And it was a computer program that used the mathematics we've been talking about, the mathematics of pharmacokinetics. It used the mathematics to give drugs in order to achieve a certain concentration in the body. So if you say, I want a concentration of propofol of 2, we've seen these concentrations, the stand pump program would say, based upon the height and weight of the patient, I know how much drug to give to immediately go to a level of 2 in the plasma and hold it there. And that is a program that I started developing it in 1986, and development of it continued for about 10 to 12 years after that.
And how widely used is that program?
Because I made the program freely available and placed it on various websites that people could download the software, it became the, if you will, the default standard because everybody could access it. And it was incorporated into many other programs by other investigators. And in fact, the pharmacokinetic engine, the part of the program that actually does the math, is taken directly from that and placed into a number of commercial devices. And there's also been Linux versions that have been created by... I'm sorry.
Overruled. You can finish your answer.
Okay.
Lennox?
There's been, again, it's open source. I've made the code freely available. So people have taken it and created Linux versions of it. And it's used as a reference program to say if stand pump predicts something, then that's understood as a reference piece of software.
And you've, again, provided that completely free?
Yeah, no strings attached.
And why'd you do that?
To promote good science.
Just a moment. What's
Objection to relevance.
that? Overruled.
To promote the science?
To promote the science.
Could have had great monetary value if you'd sought to sell it for profit, correct?
Testifying.
I'll sustain the objection. Re-ask it, please.
Would that have had great monetary value?
I haven't really thought of it. There would have been some.
Now, when you did the demonstration of the 100 milliliter bottle with the spike
Yes.
hole in it, or spike linear rent in it,
Yes.
and one of the points you made was that it had to be a vented line because otherwise the propofol would simply sit in the bottle and would not drain out unless the infusion line was vented, allowing it to flow, correct?
That is correct.
And other than knowing it had to be vented and knowing that, for example, People's 157, that infusion line was recovered at the scene, you cannot say with certainty which infusion lines were actually used on June 25th, 2009, correct?
Correct. It simply has to be vented.
And when you began testifying last, I believe it was Thursday, the October 13th, was it?
Yes.
You had not physically seen People's 157 to personally look at it, correct?
That is correct.
You had seen it on the internet,
I had seen it on the Seacoast website.
and you'd attempted to order it, but had not received it.
That is correct.
And did you have a chance to look at People's 157 this morning?
I did.
Following your testimony on Thursday, you actually were taken away from this case, at least physically and or mentally, due to a family situation you needed to deal with, correct?
That is correct.
Had you intended on physically looking at People's 157 earlier than today?
Yes.
And this was a death in your family?
Yes, that's correct.
And when you looked at People's 157 today, did you observe that it was, in fact, a vented line?
It is. That is correct.
And People's 157 that I'm holding here today. And if I put it on the Elmo, can you show us to what you're referring?
Yes.
You could use the microphone as well, Mr. Walden. Thank you, when you get a chance.
Yes. This right here is a little plug, and this is a little plastic tip that can be pulled back and allow air to go in. And so this is quite clearly a vented line where air can go in and go up here so that, for example, propofol could come from a glass bottle through this tubing. That is correct.
And you, after observing People's 157 this morning and seeing that it was in fact a vented line, in my presence, did you inform Mr. Chernoff?
Yes, yes.
Now, looking at the Seacoast medical records, and I'm referring to the date of April 14th, 2009, in those records, first of all, it goes on to 2 pages, but we have the XL IV administration set, one ordered and shipped, and then the description goes on to the next page, being the IV administration set 50 count. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right. And is that the same product as People's 157?
Yes, it is.
And so as reflected in the April 14th, 2009 Seacoast records, that would be 50 vented infusion sets.
That's correct.
And then going to May 12th, 2009, in the same Seacoast records, which are People 79, May 12th, you have, do you see here the same XL administration set, 50 count, and 2 ordered and shipped, so that's another 100 of these infusion sets?
That's correct.
So learning that People's 157 was in fact vented, and you previously testified for the need for a vented line to infuse the propofol bottle, there are actually more vented lines, infusion lines that Dr. Murray ordered than you previously understood.
That's correct.
150 more from those 2 entries.
Correct.
Now, in the demonstration that you set up then, knowing that People's 157 is in fact vented, this line, People's 157, could have been, well, not People's 157 because there's no propofol in the long tubing, but an XL administration set could have been spiked into the propofol bottle.
Yes.
And People's 157, as you demonstrated, could have been spiked into a saline bag.
Correct.
And then joined up, as you demonstrated, at the Y connector.
Correct.
And again, with that being the scenario, you could actually do that same setup with 2 XL administration sets and not even have to utilize, I believe it was People's 80, the safe site administration set.
Correct.
And People's 157 is actually much smaller and less cumbersome than the safe site infusion set that you use for part of your demonstration.
Absolutely.
And with that set, assuming 2 XL administration sets were used, it would be the same explanation as you described, with the being consistent with propofol being in the short tubing after the Y port, because that's where the propofol would have entered from the 100 milliliter bottle.
Correct.
You were asked about the IV bag with the slit in it, and you indicated that was unusual, seeing that.
Yes.
And in fact, many things that you've learned Conrad Murray did on June 25th and the time period preceding you found to be unusual from a medical point of view.
Yes.
Not the least of which is giving propofol in a home setting such as that.
Correct.
You're also asked about extraordinary claims. Dr. Shafer, in your opinion, is there anything extraordinary or bold in your opinion that Michael Jackson received more than 25 milligrams of propofol?
No.
Isn't that absolutely supported by the data and the femoral blood readings?
Yes, it is.
And your understanding is the defense makes the same claim, that he received more than 25 milligrams?
That's my understanding.
And in all the simulations that you conducted involving self-injection, you were attempting to find a scenario that could reach those blood levels via a theory of self-injection, correct?
Yes.
And based on your analysis, you were not able to find a scenario that could explain the blood levels and also self-injection.
Correct.
You feel there was anything extraordinary about your simulation showing that an infusion line was used and continued to run even after Michael Jackson's heart stopped?
No.
Okay. That's supported by the data you have available to you, correct?
Yes, it is.
And again, because you're running simulations not only based on the data you have, but by necessity, obviously, it needs to result in the blood levels that we know were found.
That is correct.
Now, in your typical simulation, in a research capacity, you would be presented, I assume, with much more data than is available here.
Simulations are usually done based on the dose. And normally I would have a dose, a time, and an amount for the drug delivered.
And the only dose information you have here comes from Dr. Murray saying 25 milligrams, which doesn't get you anywhere near the femoral blood level in this case.
That is correct.
And so what you did is ran through a number of scenarios trying to figure out, again, a scenario that would explain all the data.
Overruled, 802.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what you found from your review of the data, again, is that an infusion line was flowing into Michael Jackson, that he stopped breathing, his heart eventually stopped as the infusion line continued. Is that accurate?
Not exactly. How I would restate it is what I found from my simulations. I could not come up with a scenario that would give you the blood levels unless the infusion was running at the time of death. I'm just changing because the word data has to be interpreted carefully here because I don't have the dose information. So I could not construct a scenario other than having the infusion run at the time of death.
And again, the reason you don't have all the data is primarily because there's a lack of medical records.
There's no record, yes.
Now, when defense counsel asked you about your report and your comment on the Demerol, as you noted from Dr. Klein's medical records, do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And is it accurate that, and by the way, let me just ask you before I get into that. You wrote a 19-page report dated April 15th, 2011?
That is correct.
As well as a supplemental 3-page report dated April 16th, 2011?
That is correct.
And then a 1-page letter dated August 5th, 2011, where you summarized the Chilean study and gave an update on that study.
That is correct.
So in your initial report of April 15th, 2011, is it fair to say that your comments regarding the Demerol were based exclusively on the medical records of Dr. Klein?
Correct.
Okay. And whether you could form an opinion based exclusively on those records alone?
And my knowledge of Demerol pharmacology as a practicing anesthesiologist, yes.
But again, but the dosages and the frequency of the Demerol Michael Jackson may have been receiving from Dr. Klein, you were getting that information straight from Dr. Klein's records?
Exactly, yes.
And based on just a reading of those records, and it was your opinion that you couldn't say he was an addict based on those records alone?
That's correct.
But you weren't disputing, I mean, you're not disputing here today one way or another, are you, that whether he's an addict or not? I mean, that's not what you've come to offer an opinion on?
That is correct.
All right. But simply that the records alone were not sufficient for you to say he was an addict?
That's correct.
All right. And you did note that there was no meperidine Demerol, right?
Correct.
No Demerol and no normeperidine, the metabolite, in Mr. Jackson's body at the time of his death.
That's correct.
And that the Demerol did not contribute to Michael Jackson's death.
Correct.
The defense has, either directly or through Dr. White, they have requested that you run a simulation for them, and I think they've demonstrated it to the jury regarding the 25 milligram dosage.
Yes.
And you provided that to them?
Yes, I did.
Did they ever request that you run any simulation that they requested you run to see if it would reach the blood levels of propofol found in the femoral blood in this case?
No, I did not receive that request.
If they'd asked you to, would you have done it?
Of course.
I believe on Friday you had referenced a number reflecting lorazepam, the drug in the stomach, and you referenced the numbers 0.008 milligrams and 1/250th of a tablet. Was that follow-up testing done by the coroner's office that you mentioned to Mr. Chernoff this morning?
Yes, that's where that number comes from.
And that was testing that actually differentiated between lorazepam, the drug, and lorazepam, the metabolite or the glucuronide.
Yes.
And the defense testing from Pacific Toxicology, I believe it was 634 nanograms per milliliter.
I thought it was 648, but I have to look. But yes, it's something in that ballpark, yes.
Okay, but that, when you calculated that, that was the number that led you to conclude that was the equivalent of 0.047 milligrams, or the equivalent of 1/43rd of a single tablet in the stomach.
That's correct.
And the 0.008 milligrams, or the equivalent of 1/250th of a tablet in the stomach, was based on the subsequent coroner testing, differentiating again between the drug and the metabolite.
Hearsay. This is hearsay.
The objection is sustained. As to the form of the question, there is no answer.
But those references were to subsequent coroner testing.
That's correct.
Now, you were asked about, or Mr. Chernoff said that, most of what you've told us here is opinion. Do you remember that line of questioning?
Yes.
And you have given some of your opinions based on your almost 30 years of experience and expertise in this area. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, in the standard of care, are these things, for example, that the pulse oximeter should have been alarmed, or that Dr. Murray should have been present and observing his patient, are those simply your opinions that you pulled out of thin air, or are those accepted standards of medical care here in California?
Those are published standards of medical care for sedation.
Okay. Published in many different publications, correct?
Different specialties who engage in sedation, and many specialties do, not just anesthesiologists, have published standards for sedation.
And what are the ASA guidelines for non-anesthesiologists?
Those are guidelines by my professional society, the American Society of Anesthesiologists. And they're our society's guidelines for non-anesthesiologists who engage in sedation, how the patients should be monitored and the sedation managed.
And that's an example of the guidelines from which these medical standards and requirements come from.
That is correct.
Mr. Chernoff had asked you about, for example, and I'm referring to People's 222. The self-injections, 6 injections, 100 milligrams each. Again, this is an example of you running various scenarios to see if you could reach the femoral blood levels that were found at the time the toxicology report was done, the femoral blood levels at the time of autopsy.
Yes, that is correct.
And you commented that, in regard to what I'm showing you here, this scenario on the screen, that you would never expect that to happen. You said because, again, in this scenario, the individual has to wake up each time to do a new injection.
Yes.
All right. Now, taking that statement, though, back to the standard of care and the foreseeability of risks and dangers of propofol, is it your opinion that, based on Conrad Murray's own words, where he said that Michael Jackson liked to push the drugs himself, and that Michael Jackson had a dependency issue with these drugs, is it your opinion that it was entirely foreseeable, if you believe Conrad Murray, that was a risk of harm that Michael Jackson could self-ingest.
He's leading his witness. He's
an expert.
Just interpose the objection.
All right. He's leading his witness, Judge.
The objection is overruled. 801. You may answer.
In your opinion, based on the medical standard of care, is that an absolutely foreseeable risk?
Yes.
And in concluding that, you actually considered Dr. Murray's own words, where he said he was aware, according to him, if you believe him, that Michael Jackson liked to push the drugs himself.
Leading his witness.
I'm going to sustain the objection under 350, 352 grounds as well. You may re-ask it.
Was that based on Dr. Murray's own words?
Asked and answered.
I'm going to sustain the objection. It assumes something, so phrase the entire question.
Did you base that opinion on the foreseeability on many factors, including Dr. Murray's own words?
Very specifically, I was struck by Dr. Murray's words that Michael Jackson liked to self-inject.
Sustained. The answer stricken. Disregard. Re-ask.
Did you base that opinion partially on Dr. Murray's own words?
Yes.
Thank you. And in your opinion, Dr. Shafer, is there any factual scenario supported by the data and the evidence in this case that explains the femoral blood levels of propofol other than by IV administration, as you have testified to and demonstrated for the jury?
I have not been able to create such a scenario except by the use of an infusion and the death of Michael Jackson during the infusion. That was the only scenario that I was able to create that was consistent with the femoral blood levels.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Walgren, thank you. This will be recross-examination by the defense. Mr. Chernoff. You may.
I do have one chart, Your Honor, one simulation. May this be marked People's 223 for identification?
It is.
Dr. Shafer, regarding lorazepam, did you in fact do a simulation involving lorazepam IV administration, again, as correctly noted by defense counsel, showing administration not starting until about 1:30 in the morning on June 25th, 2009?
Yes, I did.
And a scenario that would work is, just as an example, because again, you don't have medical records, correct?
That is correct.
9 doses via IV of 4 milligrams each, starting at 1:30, gets you the femoral lorazepam levels at the estimated time of death around noon.
That is correct.
And that's what's demonstrated here on People's 223?
That is correct.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing further.
Mr. Walgren, thank you. Mr. Chernoff, this will be recross-exam.
Doctor, I assume that last simulation that was provided you did this weekend?
Yes, at about 9 o'clock, about 10 o'clock last night. That is correct.
Based on the questioning that I asked you, you realized, hey, maybe I'll do another simulation, right?
That's correct.
And I believe the response by Mr. Walgren was this would work, right? Know what he said? This would work.
I would have to ask it be read back to me.
Let me ask you a different question.
Yes, sir.
The extraordinary claim that you made in this case, it's certainly not extraordinary that Michael Jackson had to have received more propofol than what Dr. Murray said he gave, right? That's not extraordinary, is it?
Correct.
That's correct. In fact, based on what Dr. Murray gave and based on what he told the police, you wouldn't even expect any kind of cardiorespiratory event whatsoever, right?
Just a moment.
Back to an incomplete hypothetical. Are we assuming other drugs were given, or?
The objection sustained. It may assume facts not in evidence as well. The answer is stricken disregard. Re-ask, Mr. Chernoff.
You believe that more propofol was administered into Michael Jackson at some point, don't you?
Yes, I do.
All right. The extraordinary claim, however, that you made was 100 milliliter infusion based on the demonstration that you provided to this jury. Wouldn't you agree that that's extraordinary?
It was based on the data.
Would you agree that that's an extraordinary claim, the demonstration that you gave to the jury and said occurred in this case?
Overruled.
Misstates the testimony.
You may answer it
Yeah.
and explain.
It's an ordinary claim.
Well, now we've discovered. Well, let's look at the IV that you said was used for an infusion. Okay, the IV setup.
I
That-
did,
Objection misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
The IV setup that you said was used for an infusion, you demonstrated for the jury that this particular IV set was used, and you said it was ordered from Suncoast. Do you remember saying that?
Objection misstates the testimony. Said it was a
It doesn't
possibility.
misstate that.
Ju-
Okay.
Remember?
Okay.
Wait a
Can we
minute.
approach that?
No, I'm going to sustain the objection, re-ask the question. Thank you.
Well, then I'm going to have to do it over again. Can I see the exhibits? Opening this up. This is going to be People's Exhibit 80. Judge, I'm opening.
Okay?
That's fine. I think it's a sealed package. Oh, that's fine.
May I approach the witness?
Sure.
This is what you said to the jury last week was used by Conrad Murray to infuse propofol. Right?
no, that misstates my testimony.
All right. Was this one of the IV setups that you showed? Yes?
I believe so, yes.
Is this the IV setup that you said was purchased from Suncoast?
Yes.
Is this the IV setup you said was used for an infusion pump? Designed for an infusion pump?
Testimony that it was used for an infusion.
Is it
pump.
designed for an
Just
infusion
a
pump?
moment, please.
It is designed
Wait
for...
a minute. Please. Please, please, please. What's the objection?
Misstates the testimony that he said it was used with an infusion pump.
Sustained. The answer stricken, disregard, re-ask.
Is this designed? Is this designed for...
Wait a minute. Please, don't interject.
It's an objection. It was Seacoast, not Suncoast. So the record's clear.
All right. Seacoast. Re-ask, please.
Is that what misrepresented your testimony, that it was Seacoast and not Suncoast? Doctor? Let me ask you, this is designed for infusion pumps, right?
That is correct.
Did you use this to demonstrate an infusion of the propofol?
Yes, I did.
Did you use it to demonstrate an infusion of a propofol bottle, a vial?
Yes, I did.
Now you're saying that this was not used.
Objection misstates.
Is that right?
I don't know...
Overruled.
I don't know what was used. I wasn't there.
Well, now what you're saying is that Defense W, I'm opening up. Now what you're saying is that Defense WW, which is the Excel administration site, IV setup, was vented, right?
Objection. This testimony is regarding People's 157.
May I see it?
Just a moment, please. The objection is sustained. I don't believe the witness is referring to that, so you don't have to answer anything. You can re-ask your question, please.
I'm opening up 150 site.
All right, we've got a lot of exhibits that have been opened. We need to put them back, though, when you're done using them, so we don't get them confused.
Objection. There's no question.
Well, the witness is being asked to look at something. Mr. Chernoff's indicating he's opening up something. I want something replaced, though, so we don't
Can we
have...
get? Yeah, I'm sorry, Your Honor. There's now 3 sets laying out here.
Mr. Chernoff, I don't know if you're through with any of the materials, but since they're exhibits, we need them replaced.
Well, I'm not done asking questions about it, Judge.
Okay, let's just make clear we don't want them confused. Go ahead.
I'll
You're
try to-
making reference to WW now?
Let me replace what is in your hand, Doctor, with People's 157. This is identified as the exact type of IV setup. In fact, this is the IV setup that was found at the scene. Is that right?
That is correct.
This is the Excel IV setup,
That is correct.
and this Excel IV setup is vented.
Yes, this is the vent port right here.
In the analysis that you made, you referred to People's 80 as an IV that was vented, right?
Correct.
And that was used to infuse propofol into Michael Jackson.
Objection, misstatement testimony.
I believe
Overruled.
my testimony was very clear that an invented set had to be used. And it was my belief, because I had not yet examined this, but based upon the fact that the Seacoast documentation did not say vented, it was my belief prior to this morning that there was no vent, but there is a vent. It's very clear. But my testimony was to the need for a vented set.
All right, Mr. Chernoff, you've got all sorts of materials lying on top of each other at the council table. We need the materials placed in their respective envelopes, please. So which are you putting in first?
I'm not putting anything in, Judge. I'm organizing it so we don't get confused.
Well,
Is there something you'd like me to do? Would you like me to put it away and take it out again?
I would.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here. I'm putting People's 157 in a bag, Judge. Right now. I'm putting People's 80 in a bag, small bag. And putting it in a large bag, marked as People's 80. All right?
Mr. Walgren?
I observe that.
Okay.
Okay. Now I'm taking People's 157 out again. Okay? And I'm also opening up People's 156. Okay? And I'm reaching in and I'm pulling out an ID bag. People's 157 was found, as you know, inserted into an IV bag, right?
Objection. Assumes facts, not evidence.
Do you know whether it was?
Overruled.
Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
I would want to go back and look at the report. If you will hand me the report, I'm happy to look back at that.
All right. Let me ask you a very simple question. Could Dr. Murray or anybody in that room have taken People's 157 and stuck it into a propofol bottle and drained it through an IV? Yes or no?
Is it mechanically capable? Objection, vague. Is it mechanically capable of doing that? What?
Overruled. You may answer the question
Yeah.
if you understand it.
Well, I do understand the question, but are you asking me if that's consistent with the evidence, or is it just physically
I'm asking
possible
you,
to do it?
Is it possible for him to have done that?
It is physically possible to remove that and insert it into a bottle of propofol. That would be physically possible.
He would have opened the vent, stuck it in, and it could have drained. It's physically possible.
It's physically possible.
So Dr. Murray could have done that, but you now know, or you agree with me, that the evidence shows that there was no propofol in this line whatsoever.
That's correct.
So physically, Dr. Murray could have taken this line out of an IV bag, and if he wanted to run an infusion, could have just simply put it in a bottle. Physically.
Physically, yes.
Tell us what's going where, Mr. Chernoff.
I'm putting 157 back into 157. I'm putting 156 back in 156. All right. Now it appears that your testimony is, Doctor, that your new theory is that there was actually another Excel line at the scene?
It's not a new theory at all. My demonstration was of two IV lines with the requirement that the IV line attached to the bottle is vented. That was my demonstration. That hasn't actually changed at all.
Well, but is your new theory that that particular IV line, which is recognized as People's 80, was no longer used, and that an Excel was used?
I wasn't there. I don't know which one. I just know a vented set was used.
Well, that's true. You weren't there.
Fact.
Is the answer yes?
The answer is yes. I was not there.
Everything else is stricken. Disregard.
Doctor, on Thursday, or the day that you came up with this demonstration, were you
Objection. organization came up with. The people asked him to demonstrate it.
Just a moment. It's argumentative, sustained. Re-ask.
When the people first approached you to ask you to demonstrate, were you intending to demonstrate the cut IV bag at that time, or were you intending to demonstrate something else?
Overruled. Do you understand it?
Yes.
You may answer.
I was intending to demonstrate the setup for a intravenous infusion. The primary purpose is because the plumbing is not at all obvious to a non-medical person. The need for two lines, one line being the saline line and one line being the propofol line.
Doctor, my question is this. When Mr. Walgren approached you and popped open the tab on the propofol bottle, which was marked as People's 30, were you planning to demonstrate that as a scenario in this case?
Objection. Improper. I was asking the questions of the doctor. He was responding to my questions, Your Honor.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You may answer.
I don't understand the question. First
Okay. I don't understand the question. Is the answer everything else is stricken? You may re-ask it.
You have demonstrated for this jury a propofol bottle propped up in a bag, an IV bag, correct?
That is correct.
Were you planning to make any other demonstration of any other possible scenario?
Overruled.
My scenario, can you tell me what you mean by the word scenario? I was trying to demonstrate primarily plumbing.
Were you going to demonstrate to the jury another way for that propofol bottle to have infused propofol through that line? Were you? Let me be more specific.
Please.
Were you about to demonstrate for the jury that propofol bottle was going to hang on that IV stand?
Whether or not it hung on the IV stand was irrelevant to my demonstration. I truly cared neither way.
Were you going to demonstrate that to him?
Objection, speculation. He was
Sustained. You don't have to answer it. Partial answer stricken. Disregarded.
I'll pass a witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chernoff. Anything on redirect, Mr. Walgren?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. May Dr. Shafer step down, subject to recall, Mr. Walgren?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Chernoff.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Shafer, I want to thank you for your testimony. Sir, please don't discuss your testimony or the facts of the case with any other witness until we finish the trial. And while you may step down and leave, you are to remain on call, which means you're subject to recall up until the end of the trial. Is that all right?
That is right. Yes,
Thank
Your
you,
Honor.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. May I see counsel? Thank you. Mr. Waldman, do the people intend on calling any, any other witnesses in this case?
No, Your Honor.
What is the status of the people's case?
Your Honor, at this time, subject to receipt of the remaining exhibits, I believe it's People's 214 through People's 223, subject to their receipt into evidence, the people are prepared and would ask to rest at this time.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I've conferred with counsel, and you know you're receiving in evidence People's 1 through People's 213. We're going to be discussing 214 through 223 to determine what, if any, of those exhibits will be received in evidence. Counsel need just a few minutes before we go to any defense case. And so rather than keep you just hanging here while we discuss the matter at sidebar, we're just going to excuse you for a few more moments. To the Klondike of the Superior Court back there, I hope it's a little warmer. And again, I apologize. Please remember all the admonishments. It shouldn't be more than a few minutes. Thanks for your patience.